with Legend series with Gazharian. So a couple quick things before we get started. Just some housekeeping stuff so you guys know what's going on. Everybody should be getting your Friday newsletter. Your Friday newsletter has everything that's coming up. It's got all the links, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But let me just run through a couple things that we've got coming up. So our next two conversations with Legend series, the next one that we've got after Kat is February 8th. And we've got Antonia Hawk. Antonia is the global head of the Ritz-Carlton Leadership Center. She's a total badass. And we're very, very excited for that. And then we follow that up February 22nd with David Meltzer. David's a legend in the sports world. He started Sports One Marketing along with Warren Moon, Hall of Fame quarterback. He's had an incredible career, millionaire, bankrupt, back to millionaire, fascinating journey. He's written 3 bestsellers. So we've got David Meltzer coming up on February 22nd. And then we are launching our book club. So in January, hopefully everybody is reading this incredible book. Kat, I talked to you about this last night. It's called How Will You Measure Your Life by Karen Dillon. Karen Dillon is the former editor of the Harvard Business Review. She's also the former editor of Inc. magazine. She is a multiple-time best-selling author, and she's going to be joining us live to talk about her book on February 12th. So we're excited about that. We're following that up. So our February read is Dana Cavalia's brand new book, Habits of a Champion Team. Dana is a good friend of the TCC. He's the former performance coach for the New York Yankees. If Larry Levine is on the call, no need to boo. I know you love Dana, but Dana will be coming on to talk about his book. We're following that up with probably one of the most sought after Navy SEAL speakers, Jason Redman. We're reading his book, Overcome. And then we've got Radical Candor, which is an absolute classic book by Kim Scott. And I see Kat nodding her head. This is totally up your alley. So I guess that you've read it before, but it is very, very good. So we've got a full year's worth, but that's just a sneak preview on the next 2 conversations with and the first 4 books in our book club. So for those of you who have never been on one of these before, kind of the unique aspect is this is not a webinar. This is not a podcast. This is meant to be very casual and very interactive. So we're going to open it up at about the half-hour mark for questions. And the way that we do that is in the chat, just say, I have a question. You don't have to pose what your question is because we want to try to trick Kat if we possibly can. So just say, I have a question. Kathy will let me know, and then we'll call on you and you can ask the amazing Kat Gazharian your question. So, you know, Kat's one of those people, every time I talk to her, 2 things happen. I learn something and I laugh. And I also say, why don't I talk to Kat every single day? Because the conversations are that good. So we had another one of those last night, which was a lot of fun. But she is amazing. She's the CEO of Game Day HR. She's a podcaster. She has a podcast called Values and Vino. She is a strategic advisor. She's a Forbes top influencer. And weren't you rated like higher than Gary Vee or something like that?
Yeah, I think I was number 8. And it was like above Elon Musk, or, you know, that's when you're like, all right, is this bullshit?
Right.
So how do I get above that?
that's pretty damn good. She is, so she is all of that and more. She's a huge basketball fan, and she is a super loyal and smart friend who always makes me laugh. So I am very excited to have you, Kat, with us. And I know everybody's going to learn a lot.
Yeah, thank you. That was an epic intro. And, you know, it's no wonder I was voted funniest in 5th grade. I mean,
5th grade.
Yeah. You know, I know what the crappy part was. I got most helpful in 6th grade. So my reputation was on lock, elementary school. I go to middle school. I get most helpful, which if anybody here remembers is 6th grade, which means I was the butt kisser. So that was the end of my comedic career.
I don't think so. I think you could do stand-up if you wanted to. I really do. I really do.
I remember the picture that they took for the yearbook. They had me holding chalk erasers.
Really?
As if I was most helpful because I helped
right
empty the chalk erasers.
So when you tell your daughter that, your daughter probably doesn't even know what chalk erasers are.
No,
they don't even exist in her world.
No, I know. All I'm saying is that the superlatives, as high as it got me in 5th grade, took me down for the rest of my schooling career in 6th grade.
But funniest in 5th grade, you'll take it. It's on.
I mean, I've had to live it up. That's why you say about that I'm so funny and that you laugh. It's because it's trauma.
I know, it's childhood trauma. It's deep seated. Well, we're gonna have a shrink session after this. So one of the things, Kat and I are both kind of in the talent space, and we think about people strategy and all that fun stuff all the time. And obviously that's kind of what TCC is all about, which is thinking about how to do your people strategy better. So Kat, to me, I think companies are so screwed up when it comes to their people strategy. I mean, we've got the great resignation that everybody's talking about. We have totally disengaged employees. We have toxic work cultures. So I guess start us out with, why do you think that is? And then what do you think the potential solutions are? It's a big question.
It's a huge question. And I just want you to know, if you call me every day to have a conversation, I'm going to be sending you invoices. Right. So first of all, I think LinkedIn in general just has a ton of people who really want to position themselves as certain thought leaders in the space. And so I think number one, it's not accurate. A lot of the information that's out there isn't accurate. I think that people really, they want to push their brand. They want to be culture connoisseurs. And so they make these big gaping, ideas, and you have CEOs or you have people in organizations reading them, and they're essentially falling victim to this type of information. And so, you'll read an article that says something like, your all of your employees want to work from home forever. And if you don't do this, you're going to lose all of your employees. Well, that's not necessarily true. It's not, and because that's not true, you have organizations that are trying to make these accommodations without really looking at who the people of their organization are. What do those people specifically want? And so our first problem is we're not using data to make decisions, actual data from the actual demographic of your organization. So we're not using data. Number two, we make everything a priority, which means nothing is a priority. And so you're bombarding employees with, take this survey, and then they're not really seeing things happen. And there's this huge amount of changes that are happening, which they can't really keep up with. And so we're not prioritizing what the next most important thing is. And number three, unfortunately, we're still in a mindset of, Scott, you are you when you come to work, you leave all your personal stuff at the door and that's it. we still believe that there's a possible separation between who you are as a professional and who you are as a person. And that's just not the case. You know, who we are is who we are. I mean, I may not fart in front of people at work while I'm on a call or something like that, but for the most part, you know, I am me. I come with my values. I come with my belief system in this job, whether I directly or indirectly behave in that way. And so I think the third thing that organizations aren't really paying attention to is it's not always how do you make them better at their job, but how do you make them better people? Not saying that they're not good people, but how do you help them create a life that they absolutely love? And as an organization, because we can't wait for Scott to go do all of, you know, the ayahuasca retreats and read all the books and for him to find out what he really values in life, as an organization, we have a responsibility to help facilitate this type of information for them. So I think those are the three biggest problems that we're seeing. It's very unintentional strategies that are being deployed, whether it's from recruiting to engagement, to anything really. It's just, you know, we want to attract top talent. What does top talent mean to you? You know, like we can't, if you're putting out a blanket strategy, you're not going to get anybody in your net because guess what? Everybody's doing the same exact thing that you're doing. So maybe you need to be specific about what a talented individual looks like for your organization. And so I think it's just a lack of intention across the board. And then that obviously comes with no data being used. We believe that there's separation in professional and personal strategies and values. And, you know, we're just not really tracking anything. We're not really looking at what the actual demographic of our people need.
So when you coach your clients and you have an impressive roster of clients, what are some of the things, the tactical things you tell them that they need to do? It's like step 1, step 2, step 3.
Number one, so what we used to come in with is we need to benchmark the data first. And so typically that would come in the form of a very robust climate survey. You know, so there's going to be questions on there, you know, do you feel your work is valued? Do you have the tools that you need to be successful? Do you feel like you have work-life balance? So we're taking all of these metrics from their demographic of people, and then we're determining what the attractors are and what the detractors are. You know, what is making them, so an attractor would be like about 80% of the organization is rating it like an 80% or above. You know, they're agreeing on these statements. A detractor would be anything less than 80%. So we take those and we essentially create a fully transparent communication vehicle where we're doing a presentation to the entire company. Like, here's what you said. And then here's what we're going to do about it. And so we choose the detractors, which ones we want to work on, because again, you can't work on all of them at the same time. It's just not feasible to believe that you can put all this focus into 10 different things. So we pick 3 max. How are we going to get these next 3 things better? And maybe those three things, the initiatives behind those 3 things are what really shoots the engagement up. And maybe the things that are left behind, we're talking 1 or 2% difference. So we look at the 3 things, we put those strategies behind those 3 things, and then we retake the data in 3 months. And then once we really start seeing improvement, now we're only taking the data twice a year, because we don't want to bombard employees with surveys, right? Because at some point they're going to just answer it in a way that they just want to get it over with, right? Like maybe if I just give all 5s, they'll stop asking me these damn questions.
Right.
So that's how we used to come in. And then I saw that there was like a problem. Some organizations, this worked really well if the founding team or the executive team were all on the same page. If they weren't on the same page, then we ended up doing a values workshop with them. And so I would come in, I'd give them some pre-work that they needed to do, which is, pick from this list of 50 values, pick the ones that resonate with you the most, no more than 5, define them. Like, what do those actually mean to you? For example, integrity to me might mean different to you. Integrity to me is saying or doing what you say you'll do when you say you'll do it. That's what integrity means to me. To you, it could be different. It could be more like an honesty, right? Mm-hmm. So define it. And then we go into the session. I ask everybody to read off what they picked. And then we start grouping them together, like the similarities. And then we take those similarities of the values. For example, some of them are synonymous, right? Honesty and integrity, they're pretty synonymous. They may not be synonymous in terms of definition, but they're synonymous in the way we behave. If I'm a person with integrity, I'm going to behave probably like a person that's honest as well. So we started grouping those together. We looked at what the common values were of the executives, and we compared it to the organizational values. Sometimes they would be completely off. And so now you just found the root of your misalignment. Now you're realizing, oh, we're saying these are our values, but the people who make up the executive team don't value these. We're not saying that we don't value, but they don't prioritize those values. And so from there, we started putting together ways to define, holistically, now what are the organizational values? How are we going to launch these with the group? And then that's when we go into the client survey. So now we start going in with, are your values actually aligned with the organization? As an executive team, are your values aligned with the organizational values? Because they're not different.
Right.
My values in business are the same as my values personally. Family is my value personally, and it's also my value in business. Because I know if my family is not okay, I'm not going to do business very well. It's just not going to happen. And so to think that you have different values, I believe is something that we're working on validating. It's not true. You don't, I don't know about you, but I don't take my fun hat off when I come into work. It stays on with me and I wear it all day long. I don't take off my integrity hat. Like, we are who we are. And I think once we start closing that gap of separation that we believe is possible, organizations would have a much easier time really figuring out what their employees want from them.
So I think one of the things that we talk about a lot as a community is, we're trying to develop people over everything leaders. And I think, by doing that throughout a whole organization, your chances of building a great culture are far greater than companies that, what I see is I see CEOs that say culture is the most important thing. People are the most important. But then they kick everything over to HR. And oh, by the way, HR, if you had to stack rank every department, like who has the most power, who has the least, HR, they give HR the least amount of power, yet they expect them to execute on delivering a great culture, as opposed to trying to develop leaders that take personal responsibility for the culture of the company.
100%. I agree with that. And there is many moving things that are happening in that situation, which isn't always entirely the leadership's fault. It's also the way we've defined HR over the last few decades. And so the way we've been defining it has taken away our seat at the table. And then additionally, not anybody in this group, obviously, but a lot of I don't know about you, but I didn't have dreams as a little girl to become an HR professional, right? I wasn't like, wow, I really, really want to grow up and be the only adult in the room sometimes. And so a lot of professionals have fallen into the HR profession, and maybe they had other dreams, instead. And so And so sometimes I think number one, their HR has become like the, they're calling it like the revenue sucking. It doesn't drive revenue. It doesn't, everything that HR does is indirect to revenue. At least that's what the misconception is, right? And then you have people in HR who don't really like people. So
I literally had this situation, and I hope to God these people are not on the call. I don't think they are members, but I have a potential client, and this is almost $100 million company.
Okay.
And the CEO founder, his wife is in charge of HR. And she literally told me, yeah, I'm not, like, people drive me crazy. I'm like, that is freaking insane that would happen.
Yeah. And it's very real, and it happens more often than we think it does, And so and maybe there's a plight there. Maybe they feel like they gave up on other dreams and they just need a perception shift, right? Like there's something really, there's a lot of joy that comes from being able to be passionate about the success of every single person in your organization. There really is. There's a tremendous amount of joy in, Scott, what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do I help you build a life that you absolutely love? I think when we focus it that way, instead of my goal is to make sure the company doesn't get sued. My goal is to not have penalties or wage and hour claims or whatever. I mean, there's so much more to HR, but the problem is we're being hired to just make sure they don't get sued. And I think that in itself, so it's a 4-pronged problem. Right. I think that it takes a shift for everybody to really, truly understand the joy in HR, the profit margins in HR, and what it means to actually be people over everything. I mean, we could say it, right? We could say it, we could wear the shirts, but what does that actually mean? Like right. when situations get hard, what is it? How do we know that when there's a fork in the road, we're choosing people over everything? Or, and are there exceptions to those things? I'm going to give you an example. There was a situation, and I may be crucified for this, but it is what it is. There was a situation where there was an inappropriate relationship between a female employee and a male executive, and it was clearly consensual. Investigation went through. There was no harassment. It was clearly consensual. She was upset when he ended it, and so situations happened, right? And then it gets reported to HR, and this like huge thing happens. When I came to the situation, I looked at it from her perspective of how do I ensure that she doesn't do this, she doesn't make this mistake again? Because it is. I think when you kind of, you shit where you eat, there's problems that come with that. And so how do I protect her from that situation, her as a human, yep. And it just got ugly. Like she was telling everybody about it at work, and then that kind of creates discomfort, and it was just really rough. And then he ended up getting fired. She ended up staying because the board was afraid that she would sue. So all this happens because of a situation happens. The CEO leaves. She's now the CEO leaves, the company tanks to a point where everybody who was like a shareholder, it was worth nothing. And so now she's being ostracized because now they're like, this is because of you. So when I talk about when decisions get hard, it's, do you take a risk? Was it worth you possibly getting sued and maybe paying her a settlement to go have a fresh start? Or was it, or keeping her on to try to shut her up, and now she's ostracized and now the company has tanked? I don't think we did her any favors. I think we made her situation worse. So this is when I'm talking about when things get really hard, what are you going to do as an organization? And if you don't have your values set up and your system of, look, I value her as an organization. So I think it's fair to say, Scott, that in this situation, they valued the organization over the person.
Sure.
They didn't look at the long term. They weren't protecting her from anything, right? Yeah. And so, and in that situation, 9 out of 10 companies would have made the same decision. 9 out of 10. And so I'm here to say that that one decision changes the entire trajectory of that company and her life.
Right.
You know, and so in that situation, they should have chose her well-being and said, you know what? If you feel like you want a settlement, let's do this. Go have a fresh start somewhere else. Don't make that mistake again.
Right.
But now it's like completely ass backwards, right? So people you have to define what that means, you know, and what do your values mean? And when shit hits the fan, what are you going to do? We're seeing this now with like COVID mandates, right? Like the vaccines. And I'm not here to say that companies should do one or the other, but if your decision doesn't align with your values, you're going to lose a lot of good people who were with you because of those values. And so do you take the pain now? Do you make it hurt just a little bit right now for radical loyalty and transparency later? Or do you just kick the can down the road and it's going to hurt way worse?
Right.
This is where organizations, I think, make decisions that really implode their people strategy.
I would agree. You know, it's fascinating. You know, I love when people say, you know, you have to be authentic. You have to be authentic. And I agree with that. But the problem is, like a lot of people's authenticity is that they're assholes. So that's a big problem. And it's like, you can talk about values all day, but when your leadership doesn't really have great values, and it's more monetary than anything else, which is the case for a lot of companies, you have a big problem. You know, so these are things that are, I think, very, very, very hard to fix. Mm-hmm. What's maybe the dumbest thing that you see companies do that they could fix easily? I don't know if that's a fair question.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I always laugh at the like founder or like CEO or whatever who makes decisions for like the majority of their organization with the philosophy of, well, if I were an employee, this is what I would want. Like that one always gets me because I'm like, when was the last time you were an employee? Because things have changed pretty drastically, you know? And even for me, I'm like 6 years out. And so I have to watch myself of like, well, if I were an employee, this is what I would want. I'm out of touch, right? I don't know what employees mm-hmm. want. I haven't operated in that. So I think asking them, I think the number one thing organizations can do right now is ask their employees what they want. What do you want?
Right.
And then try to give it to them.
And making sure that you have a culture where there's not going to be repercussions if you actually say what you want. Because I think that's a huge problem, is that there are a lot of companies, like their lips are moving and they're saying, you know, tell us what you want. But you know, like, if I really tell you what I want, I'm going to get my head lopped off.
Right. And that's like that was the benefit for us in doing a climate survey, was because we were a third party. Employees were really honest about how they felt. I think when an internal HR department is running a survey like that, there's always, especially if you know the people in HR personally, right? There's always that risk of, are they going to get upset if I say this? And, you know, we keep it's anonymous. So the clients never find out who answered what. They'll know the department, and what the engagement was like for each department, but they never find out the individual's name,
Right.
who answered. And so an internal HR department does have to kind of climb that hill, in really setting themselves up for their employees to be completely honest with them. And even sometimes it's just as simple as a note, like, we will not take retaliation over you. We want you to be honest. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. But if you have an HR department that maybe has already done things to kind of rock the trust boat a little bit, it's going to be difficult,
Right. Kat, we have people lined up to ask you questions. So we are first, we're staying in your state. We're staying in California. Chad, you're up.
Represent. Let's go. Chad, this is awesome. It's pretty cool too. I found out that we're mutually connected. My good buddy Matthew Greco, who I went to Chapman with.
Oh yeah, Matt's our client.
Oh really? Okay,
yes.
Yeah. I was like, Cass, we're mutually connected. Oh yeah, she's been helping me, but he didn't specify what. But I figured it was probably HR, so that makes sense.
Yeah, he's in my group too. We're in a Gen X. It's kind of like a YPO type of group. So I actually met him through there.
Oh, okay. Ishmael Amin. Ishmael,
yes.
I think is there
Ishmael,
as well.
his wife is in it. Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Ishmael, I was his health coach. But same time, but we won't get into all that right now. But I'm just curious, throwing a little curveball, stepping outside of the HR conversation, which is very insightful here. I believe you're gonna have an intriguing answer. If there was one person you have a meal with, who would that be and why?
Lucille Ball, hands down.
Wow.
Yeah, she, her, and first of all, my mom makes fun of me because I'm just gonna say I have a flavor for the Latin gentleman, and so I was like 6 years old watching I Love Lucy with her, and I was so captivated by Ricky Ricardo, and she was like, "What's your deal?" And I'm like, "He's so handsome, Mom," and so I have loved what people don't know about Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz is they changed how how television is filmed using like multi-camera cinematography. They were the first to have a couple sleeping in a bed, like on a TV, like together on a show. I would just love to have had a conversation with her about what she experienced and, when there was a fork in the road, why she made the decisions that she made. So hands down, forever and always, Lucy's my girl.
Wow. That was quick.
Yeah.
That was like a setup.
I did reports on her growing up. Like that's how it's a tiny little obsession, tiny bit. I mean, if it's not her, it's Jon Snow from Game of Thrones because he's cute.
It's not. I'm shocked you didn't say Kobe.
Kobe, Kobe would have been second probably after Lucy. I think Lucy, she was like first impression with me. Kobe, I was probably I was 10 when Kobe came into the league, and I was really barely starting to understand basketball. But the truth is, there's a lot of stuff on Kobe out there that you can listen to and kind of get an understanding of what he was thinking and how he overcame. There's not a lot on Lucille Ball.
So. Love it. All right, we're going to New York. Morgan, you're
up.
Go
Rams. Go Rams, Chad.
Awesome. Awesome. I think Chad's gonna yeah. Oh, he took himself off mute.
I'll be there.
Starting something now. So hey, thanks, Scott. Kat, real nice to meet you. Morgan Gebhardt from the beautiful snowy mountains, the Catskills, upstate New York. I have a bunch of questions I'd love to ask you. I mean, everything from these ayahuasca retreats and where you're getting the stuff, how you're actually suppressing those farts in those meetings. I've never been able to figure it out myself. And the funny hats as well. I wonder where you get them. But I wanted to draw a little on personal experience. A lot of this is sort of striking home for me. I once worked for a founder CEO who made a good show from a values perspective of wanting to engender continuous feedback from the employees, quarterly town halls, surveys. But behind the scenes, he was pressing HR, for example, to make sure that every survey question that was submitted, every piece of feedback that we were getting, we wanted to make sure we had the contact details of the employees, so we knew who those people were, ostensibly so we could reply to them, but really it was so we can weed out those negative voices in the organization. So from your experience, have you ever had to confront a client who on the surface was looking like they were working to be very constructive and create positive change within the organization, really shift the culture, but in the end, maybe it was a facade, or maybe even further, have you had to fire a client because you realized that their values were not aligned with what it was that they hired you to do?
Yeah. So actually, number one, if you lean a little bit and you pull one of your butt cheeks apart, the fart can't be heard.
Got it. Thank you.
I know. Life hack. Number two, yes. There is a public company that, they did this whole press release that they were partnering with us, and like how excited they were. And, when it was, we were like 6 months into it and we weren't doing any of the initiatives that we had talked about in the original like proposal and plan. And so all they wanted us to do was recruit for them. And I try to explain, there are multiple conversations I had with them, and I'm like, I'm not doing it because I don't like your culture. If I don't like your culture, I can't get paid for direct hire placement because they're not going to stay. And so I'm just wasting my time. And I gave them data. I gave them everything. And the response was like this esoteric idea that you have and blah, blah, blah. And so I did have to terminate services with them because number one, it's our brand too. I do have to look out for our brand. And so if we have like wrongful terminations and wage and hour claims against our brand, that's obviously not going to look good for me. So I think, luckily I had done so much work in my values, Morgan, that I can sense it a lot quicker now, just through like initial calls. And it's easier for me now to, say, you know what, I don't think we're going to be the right solution for you. Like, if you just want a handbook, like it ain't us, So yes, that has happened. And yes, I have walked away. I've probably walked away over the last 6 years, I would say 3 times I walked away from, but that one was the biggest one I could think of because they're a public company. And so it was really hard for me because, I was excited. It was a public, like I even bought stock in their company because I'm like, yeah, like we're totally, stock's going to go up with us on board, And so I had gotten too many tentacles in there. And so I did have to pull out. And honestly, I don't think they're doing very well right now.
Usually they won't if the culture is bad. Hey, Scott, if the next person you go to is also a big baller or basketball fan, I'm going to say there's some bias at work here.
There could be. I don't pay, whoever raises their hand, they raise their hand. I have no control over this. We're going to sunny Florida and Jeremy.
I have 2 words to say. Emotional damage. If there's any TikTok people out there, the fart talk is killing me. But
or Jeremy, are you one of those guys who think that females don't fart?
Anal, speaking of non-fart jokes, but no, just kidding. My question is, when you have a situation where the exec team isn't aligning with the corporate values, I believe that corporate values should shift over time, just as personal values shift with innovation and the growth of a company, and our cultures all change. So do you maybe look at doing a compromise to bring the company's values into the group, but people, tend to leave? So how do you really deal with when you have, 2 separate stacks of values? Because all values are good, but if they're not aligned, which way do you bend for that?
Yeah, I obviously there's you hope there's some overlap, right? So maybe your top 5 values, maybe 3 of them match the organizational values. And so the problem, Jeremy, is number one, we're not even analyzing this, right, in organizations. Yeah. So, and I do think like generationally, you kind of have like the cycle of people coming in and out, just personal age, things like that, right? So you should always look to see, do we still behave through the guise of these values or not? And if you don't, then you definitely need to update them to reflect. I mean, the truth is it's from the top down, right? The top typically influences what happens all the way down, at least they should. And so, and it could even be, there have been situations where maybe the executive team has a certain set of values, and then you run an analysis on the rest of the organization, and the population of the rest of the organization have different values. So then it be like, who's do you follow? Right. And you always want to look at, I mean, am I like, if Jeremy's going on Glassdoor posting anonymous reviews about how much we suck, do I really want to follow Jeremy's values, or do I want to follow Chad, who, unfortunately, he's a 49ers fan, unfortunately, but he, is willing to help out. He collaborates with other departments. Like which person do I really want to look at and kind of mirror the organization on? So it's definitely a dance. You're not going, if you're a long established organization, obviously there are milestones to updating your values, right? Because you have so many people. Some organizations, like big ones like SAP, they even have it departmental. Like one department will have a different set of values than another department. And that's okay too, as long as what the work they're doing contributes to the overall mission of the organization. So you can silo it, if it's a huge organization, but for the most part, I haven't worked with a enterprise size company. So I haven't really gotten into that issue where I've had to okay, your values are here, your values are there.
There might be a case where they're just not spreading the word enough, or they're not saying it enough in enough places for people to go, hey, I know the values they're looking for. So they, those are good values. I kind of identify with those, so if they actually got their message across to employees better, they might be better off, see more of a, correlation of those values. But when nobody knows what the values are, then you're just picking stuff off a list. Then that's probably how that happens too.
I had a client that had 15 values, and I'm like, bro, this isn't gonna work. Like no one can I'm like, I took the paper away. I'm like, what are your values? It was like, I'm like, if you can't name them, how do you, it's one of those, if you stand for everything, you stand for nothing. So you have to choose 5, 6, maybe 6 at the most. But like 5 is really, you can put them in your pocket. You can look at, you can like, okay, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're not doing. But when you had 15, it's like, like me trying to lose weight, but eat everything that I want. Like you
I resemble that comment.
Like well, I was just giving you an example. So it's like, you're going to have conflicts when you have too many values, because you can't do one without the other being compromised. So yeah, it's a dance.
Yeah. Thank you.
We are off to Seattle, Washington. Andrea, you're up.
Hi, Kat. Hey there.
Hi,
Kat. Andrea Wannerstrand, here in Seattle. And you resonated with me when you were talking about HR as the compliance cops versus really that HR joy, the profitability of HR. And I see a real shift in moving away from the resources title. And I've spent the last 15 years in multinationals. So I've seen the pockets of different cultures and those type of things. But one of the things that I think is necessary is to shift from this compliance mindset to really get to that people over everything. And I'm curious what you think are going to be some of the catalysts to help HR professionals as well as HR organizations be able to get to HR as far as joy and people impact, and being able to show that business impact the profit.
Yeah. So number one, I love Seattle. The Pink Door is my favorite, one of my favorite restaurants.
Summertime on the deck. Yes.
Yes. I love your sweater. It's a beautiful color, by the way. And third, historically, HR is understaffed. And so, you get into a situation where, hey, we have 50 employees, like, should we hire one HR person? And so I think number one, you need to staff up your HR. I mean, if you're saying that people are your biggest asset, then you should have the correct amount of team members in order to do that. And so what's happening is like you get to 50, you get to 100, you hire one person who's now supposed to be responsible for onboarding, offboarding, recruiting, policy, handbooks, and all of the transactional tasks of HR. And so you can't possibly be a gopher and get your head up to see like where the organization is going. And so I do think that it takes a sufficient team in order to get past, the transactional work, because then you can start delegating transactional work to, your admins or, your associate level ones. And then as a manager, director, or, CPO, for example, that person should be kind of overseeing the strategy of, are we going the direction we need to be going? What are our, analytics looking like, turnover, engagement, costs, and budgeting? So the biggest problem is understaffed. So I think for every 20 employees, you should have one person dedicated to HR. And so if you have an organization with 100, you should have at least 3 people on the HR team. So you have your 2 admins or your admin associate, and then you have like a director level. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's like 100 employees, you're the HR director, but you have no one to direct. Yes. Right. And so really you're spending most of your time doing HR admin things. And so then when, a pandemic happens and they have to like lay off people, they look at the director to lay off, because like now it's like, well, they're not actually doing director level stuff, right? And so we just kind of get stabbed on both ends. Oftentimes we're expected to perform with very little resources. And so obviously compliance, like you need to have, it's like the Maslow's pyramid, right? You need to get the company out of survival mode in order to understand like the psychological safety parts and the personal development parts. So compliance is necessary, but you need to build a team that can just take care of compliance only, while other associates focus on like engagement, change management, people management, and things like that.
Yeah, and I'd add on that even the large corporations that have all the different divisions, that there's still that people over everything perspective and attitude that needs to be in the hiring of the HR folks. Because you're right, at a smaller scale, that person can't stand. But even in the public companies, there's still, like Scott was describing, the person who's, I'm not really a people person, but you're in a people person role.
Right.
And I think both scaling and what you're talking about, plus the people over everything type of attitude that we need to see, is where we're going to move in getting our HR joy, and actually for folks to see business impact and that profitability coming out of HR.
Yeah. I mean, I think we should be recruiting and we should be asking questions. If people over everything is my value, for example, I'm going to ask for examples from that person during the interview process. Tell me about a time you did, A, B, and C. And see, we're not really intentional with the recruiting, and so you bring in a person and you really need this person to do the compliance part, and you kind of sacrifice the fact that they, have unconscious bias, or, they have favoritism, or whatever the issue is. And then you realize, for example, Andrea, if I was interviewing you for an HR director role and I asked you like, hey, what are your career goals? Right. And if you're like, well, I really want to be an actress. I'm like, well, shit, girl, you in the wrong field. Like this isn't going to work for you then, and I have to have the discipline to know, to say no to you. Right. And know, like, this is not your path. And so we just need so much more intention with people strategy.
I hear you. I couldn't agree more.
Thank you for your question.
We are staying in the great state of Washington. Brian, you're up.
Wow, back to back Washington. This is amazing. I think this is a first. Is this a first?
This is a first. It's a record.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, it's good to meet you, Kat. Like I have a background in tech, and as I've been working,
you do. I would have never.
So one of the things I've now evolved to wanting to be this really great people leader. And at prior companies I've worked for, I've reached out to HR and said, hey, there's this gap in between what HR can provide. And it's probably because of the staffing challenges you mentioned, where it's this community of practice, like helping like managers get better at their job, right? And not just a class, because that's scalable and recordable, but like ongoing, like peer mentorship. And so I've taken on a lot of those roles myself because I want that solution to exist. But my question for you is, have you seen a company that has sort of PM'd the talent experience like in a really disciplined way? Because, you know, I talk to my PMs and say, they take a very experimentation focused approach to find out what's going to work, but that takes time and people. Do you have a company you think of that's like, wow, they really have this nailed in terms of how they approach improving that talent experience within HR, whether that's partnering with people outside of HR or the process that they go about?
Yeah. So I'll tell you about one that isn't our client, but if you're in this space, you kind of need to know who's the who. And honestly, it's Chick-fil-A. So Chick-fil-A, obviously it was controversial, like some of the things that they kind of came out and stood by and said, and there was a fallout for them. But man, the people who aligned with their philosophies became like radically loyal. And so I commend them, not because I have an opinion of like what they chose to believe in, but I commend them for standing true to who they are and what they believed, you know? And what they do in their development is in their stores, you can't promote until you have successfully trained someone to take your position. And so it creates this like connectivity from, you know, crew member to regional manager and above, because I can't get a promotion until I've successfully and put care into your success, Brian. And so I thought it was like a tremendous employee development. You don't even have to worry about, they have no problem staffing. You know, they may in some markets, but like for the most part, you know, they create they cast a vision that you can go from crew member to manager in like 18 months. And then you can't even own a franchise unless you've gone through their program. So they don't really sell franchises outside. They, all of their franchisees started working for them. So I think that they do a tremendous job. I mean, the fact that they can close for an entire day a week, and still be as profitable and still maintain the growth rate that they have, I think they've nailed it. Their one, In-N-Out is one, right? In-N-Out has an entire university where their crew members and management team go and get consistent training throughout the year. They pay incredibly well compared to other similar industries or similar concepts. Trader Joe's is another big one that does a tremendous job. So, and they do a good job with their customer loyalty, you know, like and I think I know that they do so well from customers just because they treat their employees right. Their employees are always pleasant. My burger always tastes the same, no matter which one I go to, what time of day it is. So, and then internally for our clients, we have clients that have had a similar store development plan, and then they also do independent personal development plans. And so they really like sit down and ask, like, what do you want? You know, and how do I help you get there? And they track it. It's not just like, okay, we'll see you in 6 months, or, you know, I'll see you at the annual review, which is what I think a lot of companies do wrong. They track it. It's like a weekly, monthly, quarterly thing to make sure they're on track. If they're not, why? You know, have they changed kind of the direction? Maybe they tried something and realized it wasn't for them. So I think that customized experience is really important. And it sounds daunting, but it actually really isn't, because if every supervisor was just responsible for the people that reported to them directly, ideally, you know, you don't have a ton of people. If you have a huge team reporting to you, then, you know, they're probably in the same type of position, right? Like if I have 30 crew members reporting to me as the assistant manager, otherwise you're probably looking at like 6 to 10 people that report to you. And that's actually not that hard if you really understood your job is to make sure that they are happy doing their job. Right. So I think once you have that mindset, everybody gets a customized plan. It's a lot easier to help them succeed that instead of putting like this blanket solution over them.
Thank you.
Love it.
Thanks, Brian.
So I stopped at April with Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor. So now I'm going to go to May. So in May, we're reading Bet on Talent, and Deanne Turner, who is the 30-year head of HR for Chick-fil-A, is joining us.
Nice.
So do not miss that, because Kat just gave a ringing endorsement for the incredible stuff they did. I will throw a company into the hat that if you guys want to follow, they do a tremendous job, and that's Drift in Boston, run by David Cancel. Absolutely tremendous job in talent acquisition, onboarding, retention, diversity, equity, inclusion, like you name it. Magically, this always works out. I don't know how this happens, but the number of questions and everything corresponds with our hour that we have together. So
that's Kathy. Woo, let's give Kathy a round.
Perfect. Kathy, way to go.
The bomb.
This has been a total treat. I'm so glad that we got to share you with our community. I cannot thank you enough. What, as a community of, almost 500 people now in 29 countries, what can we do to be a resource to you, Kat?
I love getting questions and getting insights into different industries and organizations, or seeing it from a different perspective, like if you're in tech, or if you're on the financial side. So feel free to reach out and ask me any questions that you maybe didn't get to ask here, maybe more specific to your experience and your situation, because that always helps me figure out kind of what the solution could be. And if you're feeling that way, there's a good chance that other organizations are going through the same thing. And so at least I can stay up to date on the current issues that are going on.
Cool. We will definitely do that. So I wish we had more time. I was going to ask you about how the Nets are handling the Kyrie Irving situation. I think that's fascinating to me, with COVID, where he can play away games, but he can't play anyway. So I guess I need a prediction. I need an NBA championship prediction from you.
I'm going to be honest. I've been pretty disillusioned with the NBA the last couple of years, I would say. Yeah. Who's going to take it? I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead yet, but let's go with,
somebody write this down.